Hello and welcome to this year's Berlin and Security Conference. The timing could not have been better and more exciting given the German elections just yesterday. It's probably pretty safe to say that climate and the nexus between climate and security will take an even higher priority in whatever German government will emerge in coming coalition discussions. So this is a great moment for us to start. For me personally, this is an honor and a pleasure to help moderate and co-host this opening panel with our partners at Adelphi. This session actually kicks off 2 weeks of exciting online sessions discussing current developments and trying to find responses to the most urgent issues in climate and security. I'm happy to say that climate security has been a central topic also for us at the Munich Security Conference. We have long acknowledged the nexus between climate and security. And our title for this opening session is, and I quote, Multilateral Momentum Towards an Agenda for Action on Climate, Peace, and Stability. As President von der Leyen of the European Commission put it recently, COP26 in Glasgow will be a moment of truth for the global community. Indeed, with only a month to go until Glasgow, time is actually running out. Glasgow might end up a failure if key participants are not going to get their act together beginning right now. Sure, we've seen the US returning to the Paris Climate Accord, and the United States surely can help to push the climate agenda forward, moving beyond what we at the Munich Security Conference called a period and a perspective of Westlessness, where the West was no longer capable or willing to take the lead on issues of common concern, of global issues. And this is, of course, particularly relevant with regard to the climate security nexus. Before I introduce the panelists for this first session, and before we kick off this series, I want to give the floor to German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas for his opening welcome remarks. Please, Minister Maas.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, New York and the German county of Ahrweiler are far apart, but they both suffered the same fate this year. Devastating floods killing dozens of people. To other regions like the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, the Caribbean, or Southeast Asia, such extreme weather events are nothing new. Around the globe, the effects of climate change are real. And while they harm people in developing countries the most, they spare no one. Climate change is the existential threat of our time for all humankind. That is why we must make COP26 in November a success. At last week's meeting of heads of state and government, convened by the United Nations Secretary General and Prime Minister Johnson, world leaders reaffirmed that goal. Europe's Green Deal is our clear commitment to contributing our fair share in fighting climate change. And to show our resolve, Germany and the European Union have raised their climate targets once more. But climate change goes far beyond environmental, financial, and economic challenges. It threatens peace and security worldwide. Food insecurity and migration caused by extreme weather events undermine social and political cohesion, particularly in fragile states. The lack of water deepens conflicts between states. Heavy rainfall and storms affect military and peacekeeping operations. And melting ice caps expand geopolitical competition to new parts of the world. Climate and security has therefore become a priority of our foreign policy. and I'm grateful for your support and expertise in this. At this conference 2 years ago, we initiated the Berlin Call for Action. We are proud to lead the Weathering Risk Project, a global climate risk and foresight assessment. With Nauru and partners from all around the world, we set up the Group of Friends on Climate and Security at the United Nations. And we continue to push for a strong Security Council resolution that addresses the security risk of climate change. I'm glad that we all share a strong consensus on the link between climate change, peace, and security. Now we have to take the next step and operationalize this consensus. And that is what this conference is about. Over the next few days, you will discuss how to deepen and broaden risk assessments and how to convert data and analysis into action in order to make climate and security an integral part of international mediation, peacekeeping, and diplomacy. Dear friends, 2021 has further exposed the existential dangers climate change poses to humanity. But COP26 offers us a chance to make 2021 the transformative year of global climate policy that it needs to be. Our conference is a stepping stone in tackling the security impacts of climate change along that way. And I thank you all for being part of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Heiko Maas. And thanks for pointing out how important it is going to be going forward for us to turn words into actual action. So let's get right to it. It is my pleasure to welcome a distinguished panel of speakers for this opening session. It's great to be joined on this virtual stage, of course, by Rachel Omama, Foreign Minister of Kenya. As of a few minutes ago, she had not yet been able to connect to us, so I'll see whether she's actually with us online now. With Inger Andersson, the Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, UNEP, as we call it. And I see that Rachel is with us. That's great. So wonderful. Then the third one is my longtime friend from the United Nations, Rosemary DiCarlo, Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Hello, Rosemary in New York. And last and certainly not least, Benedetta Berti from NATO. She is Head of Policy Planning in the Office of the Secretary General of NATO, and most importantly, a former Munich young leader, I'm proud to say. Since we have only about 45 minutes for this discussion, I suggest that we dive right into it. And if I may, I would like to start with the Minister from Kenya, with Rachel Omama. Please share with us your perspectives and your experience from Kenya, from East. How do climate and security interact in your perception? Please, Madam.
Thank you so much for inviting me again to Berlin for this important discussion that you have annually on climate and security and other important aspects of peace. From the East African perspective, it is very clear that there is a nexus between climate change and security. We live in an area that is water stressed. We live in an area that is subjected to extreme climate fluctuations, from droughts to floods. Recently, we experienced the worst locust invasion in 70 years. At the same time, we also face the challenge of state fragility in parts of the Horn of Africa, which means that governance and institution structures are not as flexible as they could be to deal with emergencies. And more than this, we are also confronting the threat of terrorism. What climate change does is that it a threat multiplier. It catalyzes, it accelerates the negative aspects of community cohesion. It forces governments to stretch its resources, and it exacerbates poverty. So our challenge is to try and see how best we can take holistic approaches to deal with the climate change challenge, to see the manner in which it coincides with questions regarding peace and stability, and to ensure that the world recognizes that this nexus isn't a piped dream, it isn't a figment of anyone's imagination. It is alive, it is real, it's on the ground, and it is felt locally, it's felt nationally, and it's felt regionally. I thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for being brief, because as the moderator, I have to look at the watch all the time. Let's go from Kenya straight to New York, to you, Rosemary. Of course, the 76th General Assembly session was just opened a few days ago. What role has climate and more specifically climate security played beyond words and pledges? Are there key outcomes that you can see emerging? Rosemary, please, you have the floor. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be part of the discussion today. Discussion of climate change was very broad during the ongoing General Assembly high-level segment. The overwhelming majority of member states cited climate and environmental change as one of the major challenges facing the international community. And a number of countries, including those on the Security Council, spoke directly about the impact of climate change on peace and security, calling climate change a threat multiplier or a conflict driver. We heard a lot about how climate change affects lives, livelihoods, and ultimately stability. The small island developing states stressed that climate change is an existential risk, while countries from Africa and the Middle East highlighted the dangers of climate-induced food insecurity, water scarcity, and natural resource competition, all of which can lead to instability or even conflict. A common thread across many of the stations was a call for unprecedented international collaboration. It's very clear that member states, international organizations, the private sector, all need to work together. The Secretary General spoke at length on the issue of climate change, and he stated that the world is before an abyss, but it is not too late. And he said to translate these words into action, we need the following. Ambitious climate action ahead of COP26. And he suggested that the G20 nations be in the lead here. We're all looking to Glasgow, hoping for meaningful commitments at this event. He also stressed that the leadership of member states at the front line of climate-related security risks was absolutely essential. And he, of course, referred to the need to mobilize resources. The best analysis in the world cannot protect communities. We need to show political and material commitment to action. And political leadership also means engaging with all partners to drive the agenda forward.
Thank you very much. Great. Turning to Inger Andersson at UNEP, share with us, if you could, your views from UNEP about climate change as a key element for sustaining peace. You have the floor, Inger.
Thank you, and greetings from beautiful Kenya once more, where UNEP has the privilege of being headquartered. We need to understand that for 30 years, we, UNEP, together with our friends, the WMO, through IPCC, have come out with this report year on year on year for 30 years with ever greater precision, warning of what we are now seeing. This time, we didn't need graphs because the pictures on our television screens were very much the backdrop to what the Secretary General has referred to as a code red for humanity. we have seen unprecedented heating, and we at UNEP have been warning of this for 30 years. And so when we're looking at atmospheric concentrations of CO2 that is higher than it has been in 2 million years, when we're looking at concentration of methane, higher than it has been in any time for 800,000 years, now is the time, right? And we are already at 1.2 degrees, and we heard from the minister how this just 1.2 degrees that we have changed already is impacting. So when we add up, which we did a week ago, the NDCs, and see that what countries are promising amounts to 2.7 degrees at 2100, we know that it's unconscionable. And when we met in Copenhagen back in 2009, I think it was, for COP15, we promised that by 2020, we would have $100 billion every year on the table to ensure that we can get a just transition. So at this point, we are struggling about this. Okay, we've had COVID, but we have not seen the kind of solidarity that we need to have, and we nor have we seen the kind of action that we need to see. 78% of all CO2 emissions are emitted by just 20 countries, the G20. So the to-do items for mitigation is for everyone, but G20 countries have a special to-do. Article 9 of the Paris Accord, Article 5, speaks to there shall be balance between mitigation and adaptation in funding, and that is because poorer countries are taking the brunt. So hearing from my colleague Rosemary, and hearing from the Secretary General, and of course from Minister, about the imperatives of this, because we are seeing it right now. We understand that this is no longer longer in the distance issue. This is a here and now issue. Water scarcity in the Middle East, we're seeing it already. We understand that water has to be managed much more prudently. We're seeing it in terms of World Bank projecting that 260 million people will be on the move. The reality is that much of this is happening already. So the imperative of dealing with climate and seeing the fallout of failure of dealing with it is a conversation that we have to have now, which is why I'm glad that in the political realm, which I operate in on the environmental politics, there is a movement forward on having these conversations. Certainly from UNEP's side, we are seeing the science directing us on water scarcity, on inundation, on sea level rise, on falling productivity of our water, and biodiversity collapses, which will have these serious consequences that invariably will have dimensions of security associated with them. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. The last one in this opening round of comments is Benedetta Berti from NATO. So Benedetta, from a NATO perspective, what risks does climate change pose to peace and stability? And of course, the next question is, what if anything might NATO be able to do about it and to contribute to it? As a matter of fact, in preparing for this session a couple of hours ago, I read an article published by one of your colleagues, Michael Rühle, in one of the major German newspapers, which was just published this morning about NATO and these environmental and climate concerns. So, Benedetta, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. And indeed, I hope we'll have also time to talk about the, I would say, very robust set of concrete steps that we are taking as an alliance when it comes to increasing our situational awareness of the impact of climate change on security, when it comes to adaptation, and when it comes to mitigation. But first, maybe I will just underline that I think there is a very strong convergence of view already in this panel about the substantial impact that climate change has on security. And from a NATO perspective, our 30 allies have agreed that we need to take climate change extremely seriously, that it is one of the defining challenges of our time, and that it will have a profound impact, and I will say profound and all-encompassing impact on our security and our defense and on the way our militaries operate. And that's why broad and 360 adaptation is really required. And the prior speakers already mentioned, of course, one key important aspect of the risks exacerbated and fueled by climate change and security. And they talked about that nexus between conflict, state fragility, instability, and climate change as a threat multiplier. There's certainly a diagnosis that I completely share. And I think especially when we look at our broader neighborhood as an alliance, that intersection between climate vulnerabilities, humans and human security vulnerabilities will continue to be a driver and a accelerator of conflict. So that's for sure one important impact that we all need to prepare for and mitigate by working with vulnerable communities. But I would say that the impact of climate change on security is broader, and it's certainly not limited only to fragile states or to areas where conflict is already happening. I would say climate change has a daily impact on all in our societies. From a NATO perspective, it's important to talk about the security impact of climate change in the Euro-Atlantic area, where, for example, we see increased risk of natural disasters, increased risk due to extreme, more frequent and more severe weather events. These create new demands on our militaries, new demand for even stronger civil-military coordination, and impose new tasks and new roles, and put resilience in general, and climate resilience of our bases, of our installations, of our facilities, very much at the center of how we should look at the question of defense in our area. And then, of course, geopolitical competition has been mentioned already. I would just echo that sentiment. Climate change is not just having an impact on our security at home, and it's not just having an impact in our broader neighborhood. It's also affecting dynamic of geopolitical competition, for example, in the high north, in the Arctic, and that also has very real and concrete implication for our security. So because of that, I would say climate security is incredibly important from a military perspective as well as from a security one. And I hope we'll have in the rest of the conversation also a little bit more time to talk about what concretely we are doing about it, because I'm glad to say, and I'm happy to have the article mentioned today, published today mentioned, I'm happy to say that we do have a very concrete agenda that looks at awareness, adaptation, and mitigation for our militaries and for our security sectors.
Yes, exactly. There's a question that I have been asked, and that is, what needs to change in the way in which the international climate-related security risks. And one perspective is that we have to have multilateralism that's based on principles, that's based on use. Increasingly, COVID-19, with the emergence of issues like vaccine nationalism, has shown us that this type of multilateralism that seeks to further fairness, that upholds human dignity, that facilitates equal burden sharing, it's fast disappearing. Yes. And if we're going to use the spirit of multilateralism to deal with change, then we need to return to the basic foundations of our multilateral system that is based on, the human value, human dignity, human rights, and ensure that promises are kept. There's no point in making huge pledges and then not keeping them. It is important to understand that burdens have to be shared responsibly, so some parts are not overburdened with dealing with climate risks. And we need to move towards a world that is fairer, a world that is based on solidarity and not exclusion and not excess. So that would be my response to that. We need to go back to the drawing board and embrace true multilateralism if we're going to fight climate change. I thank you.
I would be really happy to step in since we seem to have lost Ambassador Ischinger. My name's Janani Vivekananda, and I am the head of program at Climate Diplomacy at Adelphi. Thank you very much for bearing with us with this technical glitch. And thank you for the excellent input just there. I think that the next point that I'd like to flag is there seems to be a really clear consensus that we need to address this gap. What are the steps to be taken? There is this very strong understanding and acceptance, but all of you have elaborated on the importance of this nexus and how crucial it is to include climate-related risks when dealing with matters of peace, security, and stability. But can you tell me a little bit about what can be done concretely? What opportunities do you see for joint multilateral action when it comes to this nexus? What do concrete steps look like? We really do. We heard in Minister Maas's comments, we need to take this moment to move from analysis to action. What do these steps look like? Inga Anderson, maybe we can start with you. Where do you think the biggest gap in responding to climate-related security risks can be found, and what can be done to enhance multilateral action?
Well, first of all, I mean, so our on-ramp here is science, right? So you cannot be surprised that I'll say, listen to the science. The science is telling this unequivocally, and it's showing up in politics, but the science is there. And when we look at climate projections, then we need to understand then what that means. And based on IPBES, IPCC, we can begin to say with a significant pixel understanding what will be the impact on northern Somalia in terms of rainfall. What would that therefore drive? Or what would be the impact in terms of already areas in Mali where you're already seeing variability or scarcity? That kind of science is available, and this means that we can do forward planning with a better understanding. We understand also that water, obviously, whether it's, let's say, in some of the former, in some of the stands, that there we are going to see significant impact because of glacier reduction. So what will that then mean in already contested situations? The science gives us a lot, and that therefore enables us to take preemptive action in engaging with and understanding that livelihoods and other elements will have to shift, and government can put the guardrails to enable that one can move from one kind of agriculture that may not be sustainable in the long run to something else. So listening to the science. But the other point is obviously that around the environmental governance at the global level, at the national level, and at the local level, it's really critical that we understand that climate change is here now, and it's gonna get worse. Even with the optimistic IPCC scenario, we will hit 1.7 to 1.8 by around 2070. And then if we do the right thing, we'll take it down again. So that means we will see more wildfires. That means that we will see droughts, different air humidities, and so on and so forth. So it is only through collaboration, for example, cooperative governance of forests, especially those that are in multiple communities or even transboundary, can substantially reduce that risk of fires, can protect livelihoods, can enable ecosystem productivity. So at the very local level, environmental governance between and amongst communities, but also at the global level. Water management is an obvious one, right? Much water, either be it aquifer-based or surface river or lake-based, is shared amongst communities for sure, but amongst countries too. The reality is that science is telling us a lot already about what will happen to these water bodies, be they subterranean or be they surface. And so beginning to understand that rather than to arm up, but rather to arm up on the governance side, on the multilateral engagement, be it or bilateral, depending as it is, there's a lot that can be done. Well-planned adaptation action and investments, just like Minister just said now, can significantly enhance the resilience of communities. But for that to happen, we need to have the resources. So there's a lot that governments can do, and multilateralism will be a critical element in enabling and delivering these solutions. Thank you.
Really important point that you stressed there, that multilateralism, yes, we think of that at the national level, but it's also about cooperation right down to the community level when it comes to shared forestry management, as you just flagged, and natural resource governance. But if we go back up to the national levels of collaboration, Benedetta, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you just alluded to in your first input. What can and should NATO do to drive this agenda on climate security forward amongst NATO members? In June this year, you, as NATO, published the Climate Change and Security Action Plan, which is a really excellent step forward. Does NATO so far meet its commitments made in this plan, and what are the steps you can see taking, and what are the challenges that you foresee?
Thank you for that question. I'll be as brief as I can, because indeed, and thank you for mentioning the action plan adopted at the summit that backs up what is a climate change and security agenda, de facto a common strategy that allies have agreed this year. So there is really a step change in how much the alliance is doing about climate change. And in terms of what concretely, of course, it goes back to our mandate and our mission, which is about the security and defense of the Euro-Atlantic areas and, of course, of our allies. And the first step that I think we took, and it's very important, is that step of awareness, the step of, first of all, on putting on the political agenda front and center the fact that climate change is one of the defining security challenges of our time, and we cannot fulfill our mission or our mandate if we don't take it seriously. So first of all, there's a number of steps that we're taking to enhance our awareness, including by mapping our climate vulnerabilities as an alliance-wide, looking at our bases, infrastructure, missions, operations, resilience, and really finding out what are the vulnerabilities and how to take steps to remedy and mitigate them. Then there's an adaptation part, which is also crucial, because the way our military operate will need to also take into account the impact of climate change on security. And this is I would say, a cross-cutting need that will affect the way we do defense planning, the way we do capability development, the way we procure our capabilities, the way we work with the scientific community, how much we lean in and work together with the private sector on green technologies. In other words, it will encompass every single thing that we do, from training to exercising to the more traditional defense planning. So that's another important area where adaptation is really front and center of the way we're thinking about climate change and security. There is another big aspect which entails how do we work with our partners, how do we work with other international organizations, and this is incredibly important because, as you mentioned, this is a truly transboundary, global, cross-sectoral, whole of government challenge. And so we need to respond by building bridges between the different community. And here, when it comes to the peace and security aspect, I really think that it's incredibly important to work between diplomacy, defense, security, development. All this community really need to talk to each other, and we are going to invest in stepping forward the work we do on climate change and security with our partnerships. And finally, just because I know we don't have a lot of time, we are also taking concrete steps when it comes to mitigation, because we recognize that being this a defining challenge of our time, simply nobody can be excluded from doing its part. That includes our militaries, and that includes our security forces, and that includes NATO. So very concretely, at the last summit, our allies did stress the importance of reducing military emissions. They also asked us asked the Secretary General to develop an initial goal for the reduction of military emission when it comes to NATO activities. And we are now developing a concrete methodology to be able to map across the alliance, because sometimes, and the issue of science has been mentioned, it's incredibly important. Also is the issue of clear, consistent, comparable data. So we're also working in that direction. And just by having this methodology, we'll be able to have something concrete to measure, track, and work towards setting these voluntary reduction goals. So there is I would say, a very robust set of program at work that I think reflects the growing political and security importance that this topic has for our allies.
Thank you very much. I think this point about reporting is incredibly important. It came up in the UN Security Council debate that Ireland called just a couple of days ago. And I think maybe it's not the most interesting or sexy dimension of this, but if we don't know the baseline and we don't know what we're actually doing, then it's really hard to get beyond the words and start to show the action and show what's working. So thank you. That's a really important point. And I think you mentioned the need to work across these different sectors, and I think this is incredibly important. We need to start seeing climate security in 3D across defense, diplomacy, and development, and that's something that I think Rosemary DiCarlo, your agency does very important work around. Can you tell us a little bit about how the interplay between climate, peace, and stability is addressed in the work of the UNDPPA, how it's successfully being embedded in peace building and conflict prevention efforts and political missions on the ground? And what do you see as maybe moments of success, but also spaces to better coordinate actions on kind of peace building and political missions at national and regional levels?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. We really are trying to take our analysis and translate it into action. It's not so easy. We are working in a growing number of contexts to bring a climate lens into our early warning, prevention, mediation, and peace building work. I can give you a few examples of this. In Somalia, for example, we're developing an initiative to bring together communities to learn more about the impact of climate change on their livelihoods and to develop solutions for shared resources to promote peaceful coexistence. In the South Pacific, we've been working with countries from the Pacific Islands Forum on community dialogues. This involves listening to people and hearing their concerns and helping find sustainable solutions to strengthen community resilience in the face of sea level rises, drought, extreme weather. And in the cross-border area of Mali and Niger, the Peace Building Fund is encouraging the active participation of women in local resource sharing mechanisms in order to reduce conflicts around natural resources. Now, climate change is altering traditional gender roles through the outmigration of men, for example, who are in search of new livelihoods, often leaving women as the de facto head of households with new responsibilities, but also new opportunities for engagement. Now, to your second question about better coordination, I just would like to highlight a few key aspects. First of all, we really do need to develop a better shared understanding of climate security risks. In many instances, communities have been adapting to changing environment for centuries, and we need to listen to them. Local knowledge and expertise are really critical to be part of the solution here. Yet what we see is that the increase of climate and security risks is such that many of the existing mechanisms really are overwhelmed. So in this case, international actors can help by building on good practice and help scale up responses. Second, I think we need stronger collaboration across policy areas. We really have to ensure that both the political and technical solutions go hand in hand. And this means breaking out of silos. I'd like to just note that the UN has established a climate security mechanism to further this approach. It brings together my department, a political department, with the UN Environmental Program headed by Ischinger and the UN Development Program. And we're trying to leverage our respective strengths to better address climate security risks. Third area, we need better partnerships to connect our efforts at all levels. We find at the UN that working with regional and sub-regional organizations is absolutely key in this area. We've been working with the Economic Community of Central African States, for example, to analyze in greater detail climate change and how it's affecting maritime security and farmer-pastoral relations in that region. And we're working also in West Africa and the Sahel with the regional organization there to diffuse tensions caused by movements of populations in light of drought and extreme weather conditions. These are just some of the examples. There's more that we're doing, and we're trying very hard to do as much as possible in this area going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosemary DiCarlo. And I think that the point about bringing in the knowledge and the expertise and the voices of those affected is incredibly important and valid. And maybe I can pass this question over to you, Cabinet Secretary Rachel Omamo. What do you think needs to be done to strengthen the voices of these of those most strongly affected by climate security risks and support the work, often excellent work, that's already being done, be it on the research, climate science side, or on the peace and conflict side, to address climate security risks on the ground?
Oh, thank you. Well, from the perspective of a country that sits on the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member, I would say that the first thing we need to enable voices to be heard is an acceptance at the level of that organization that there is a nexus between climate and security risks. There's a need for an urgent, I think, resolution to be passed sooner rather than later on this issue to ensure that it is properly securitized and people understand that peacekeeping operations, peace support operations, all interventions in the name of international peace and security then have a climate dimension to facilitate stabilization and the restoration of peace. Who are the voices that need to be heard? I think the voices of the South need to be heard. And they need to be heard quite loudly on this subject so that issues pertaining to adaptation are understood, that the financial barriers, the social, cultural barriers are understood, and that the South is strengthened in their own initiatives to deal with climate change at the local level. Climate change is felt locally. So even as we collect data, even as we undertake research, they have to be practical solutions that ordinary people can see, ordinary people can approach, ordinary people can apply. I think the voices of women also need to be heard. Women have a lot of knowledge on climate change, the manner in which it is evolving, the severe and extreme manifestations of weather patterns, because they're the ones who walk for miles collecting firewood. They're the ones who dig wells to collect water. They understand when the climate is going to change. So this traditional knowledge, this indigenous knowledge must not be overlooked. And it is the knowledge of women. It needs to be collated, it needs to be analyzed, to be applied and respected in this challenge that we are facing against climate change and its attendant security risks. And then who else needs to be heard? I think organizations like UNEP need to come back into the center of the climate change debate, of environmental multilateralism. We need to restore this organization to its salient place in this discussion. We are able to ensure that our actions are coordinated, they're led by science, and that environmental multilateralism is revered, and that it is inclusive. It includes of Africa and of the South, where the impact of climate change is most felt. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel Omamo. And I heard a very strong call for a global resolution on climate security at the UN Security Council. And since your country, Kenya, is taking up the presidency next week, I will put hope and faith in your leadership for the next month on that front. Looking forward then, I think from what I've heard is a very strong consensus that we need multilateral action. We need it at national level, right down to community level. And to move us in this direction, we need an agenda for action at the global level, but also something that resonates and filters down at all levels. I would like to end this by asking a question to all of you. If you were just to pick one thing that you would like to see as a core tenet of a multilateral agenda for action to address climate-related security risks, what would that one thing be? It can be something that you've already spoken about. It could be something new. I'm sorry to ask you just to pull out one, but if you could just give me your top pick. Benedetta, we will start with you.
I feared you might, because now I have, of course, not just one, I have more 10, but so maybe 1.5. The half that I think we need to start with as a preamble is built of this shared awareness, and I think there really is a growing political momentum to recognize the impact of climate change on security, to recognize the importance of climate security, and to move beyond frame this issue as a nice to do and really talk about it as it is, which is a must do, a generational challenge, which potentially existential implications. So that's just as a preamble. It would be good that we all agree on the framework and the seriousness and the importance of looking at climate security as a common thread in all our thinking about security, together with conflict sensitivity. And then to my one would be very, very shortly, I think that maybe not the most sexy topic, as was mentioned before, but I think that a core tenet, an area where we can do more, is sharing of data. I think that's incredibly important. Sometimes the communities and the areas most affected by climate change and would most benefit climate predictions and forecasting, and those tools are also the ones that have the more spotty data or more access, or would necessitate more access to better data in order to build the models they need to build and then inform their policies accordingly. So I think that a climate security agenda could have as a one ambition that is both realistic and important, to really share at a global level our climate data with a much more open way. And this is also a way to build bridges between sectors and communities and countries.
Thank you, Benedetta. Rosemary DiCarlo, what's your one pick for a global agenda for action on climate security?
Thank you. Let me just say, though, first that I think it's really good that the debate and the discourse on climate security is changing from whether action is necessary to what action is necessary. But if I can zero in on just one issue, I think it's important to note that the effect of climate change is not distributed equally, that women and girls face risks both from climate change and conflict, and that the meaningful participation of women and the leadership of women brings far more durable solutions that benefit more people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Inga Anderson, what would be your core tenet?
I have to thank Rachel Omamo for calling out for a strong UNEP in this field. So thank you for that. You know, when 8 out of 15 countries most susceptible to climate change also host a peacekeeping mission or a special political mission, that leaves cause for pause, right? So from my one thing, because you only allow us one, is we've got to, based on science, help countries adapt much better to climate change. And that means investing in nature. That means obviously mobilizing the resources. That means restoring ecosystems in crisis-affected countries. And it means working at the global and national levels to make that happen with inclusive institutions so that we can prevent conflict. We spend so much money once a conflict has broken out, but the science is telling us where it's likely to happen. And we at UNEP, we sit with that science. So listen to the science and act on prevention.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And last but not least, Cabinet Secretary Rachel Omamo.
Thank
What
you.
would
I
be
just
your
want to
full-time role?
reiterate the point that I made earlier. There will be no collaboration, no sharing of data, no sharing of responsibilities, unless our climate action is based on a multilateral system that is based on fairness, based on justice, and based on the pursuit of human dignity. We have to go back to multilateralism. Otherwise, we'd fail. It's essential that we do what multilateralism was supposed to do, and that is ensure that everybody carries the burdens that they can, that people share, they share knowledge, and that everybody receives the humanity and the sanctity of human life. And accept that. Otherwise, we'll be talking endless and not taking the action, things that will.
I think we're losing Cabinet Secretary Rachel Omamo, but I think we get a very, oh, you're back with us. But thank you very much for your points. We just lost you at the end, but I think we got a very clear impression of the point that you were trying to make around fairness and justice. Thank you so much to our panel. I think fairness, justice, inclusivity of women and other marginalized groups, fact-based, taking account of science, these seem to be absolutely what needs to underpin our multilateral efforts to move towards action on climate security. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our excellent panel, Rachel Omamo, Inga Anderson, Rosemary DiCarlo, and Benedetta Berti for this inspiring and insightful discussion, not just for this discussion today, but also kicking off the 2021 Berlin Climate Security Conference in the best possible way. Thank you also for bearing with us with our technical glitch, but I'm delighted to say that I can now hand you back over to Ambassador Ischinger, who will just say a few final words to wrap up this session. Ambassador Ischinger, over to you.
I was thrown out by the internet, I guess. I have a suspicion of who did that to me, but I'll not dwell on that now. Impressed by the determination, and I wish to say that my takeaway from this hour, this opening hour, is that there is a great sense of urgency, which all of you have communicated. I will certainly want to make sure that we will take this, we will make sure that climate nexus will continue, I should say, prominently a security conference going forward. Finally, I also want Foreign Office and, of course, Adelphi for all the preparatory work and conference. Thank you all. Thank you very much, and much more success in these coming hours. This wonderful conference. Thank you so much.